So welcome back to Live from Paris, and time now for Campaign Chronicles. It's our daily look at the race for the French presidency, and today we're looking in fact at the economy. Commentators have called it missing in action from this presidential campaign, but voters say it is the main issue they'd like to hear more about, and they just don't think our politicians are talking enough about it. For more on this, joined as ever here on set by our press reviewer Elena Casas, and also hopefully to be joined shortly by the Economist Paris Bureau Chief Sophie Pedder. Elena, let's start with you. Economy making headlines today, is it?
Yes, or rather Nicolas Sarkozy's somewhat maladroit handling of the economy, according at least to some newspapers. He's managed to upset all the unions, which has got him on the front of left-wing paper Libération with the headline, "The Antisocial President." Now, what's their problem? Essentially, he attacked the union, the CFDT, yesterday, saying that they had betrayed the trust of their members by attacking him personally and trying, he said, to break into his campaign headquarters. That was because of a protest that they held last week with about 150 people who worked for the steelworks ArcelorMittal. Of course, they were bought up by that multinational, and then it looked like their jobs might be outsourced abroad, and the president has personally helped to try and get them their jobs back. What he's trying to do, essentially, is separate ordinary workers from organised labour, with whom he has a rather fractious relationship. So he's telling the workers, I'm representing you and the unions don't. Now, Les Echos points out today that he did actually start his presidency with quite a good relationship with the unions, but it's deteriorated, at least since the raising of the retirement age in 2010, which he steamrolled through in the face of a lot of union opposition, got lots of demonstrations out onto the street. They even say in today's paper that if he continues like this, we can expect more social unrest from another Sarkozy presidency if we get one.
Now, across southern Europe, of course, we've already seen widespread union anger, of course, following austerity measures imposed by governments trying to deal with them. Economic crisis, Sarkozy, it hasn't really gone that far in that direction, though, has he?
No, and even the left-of-centre paper Le Monde is questioning today whether he might actually not have gone far enough. They're looking at the flexibility of work inside, something, of course, which has led governments in Spain, Greece, Italy to implement very far-reaching labour market reforms to try and make their labour markets more flexible and create more work in the economic crisis. France hasn't gone very far in that direction at all. Remember, in Sarkozy's campaign in 2007, there was a lot of talk about work more to earn more, a lot of talk about ending the 35-hour week, things like that would be good for business. A lot of that didn't actually happen, and now he's barely mentioning the subject at all. Le Monde says all the candidates seem to avoid it because it's just so taboo for the French. They don't want to hear anything about the rights that French unions have long fought for being eroded in any way. Now, the Anglophone press, Anglo-Saxon press as the French call it, have been a lot more severe with the French candidates in this direction than the French press have been. There are some critiques there, as we said, from Le Monde, but a lot of the British papers have been much tougher. The Economist last week said, or this week's issue that came out on Friday, says France is in denial on its front page, saying all the candidates are completely refusing to address the elephant in the room, which according to them is France's massive debt and structural economic policies that it has, like very high public spending, which none of the candidates really plan to cut. They've got policies to cut the debt, but they're based mostly on the prediction of economic growth that may or may not happen, and also big tax rises.
OK, it's dramatic stuff, isn't it? You've got a guest, haven't you?
I do. Yes, if we can now bring in the Paris bureau chief for The Economist, which indeed wrote that rather coruscating editorial that we just mentioned, Sophie Pedder. What brought you then to such a damning indictment of the candidate's economic policy?
Well, I think it's really observing what's happened over the last 3 months since the beginning of the year during this campaign. There was, at the beginning, there was a sense from Nicolas Sarkozy that he was talking about things like the problem of the cost of labour in France, lack of competitiveness, talking about the German model. But he pretty much dropped that almost immediately because it didn't seem to be very popular. It wasn't getting him anywhere. And the campaign moved on to other things. And then since then, we've had, week after week, discussion of immigration, of issues that have got, that are not insignificant issues, but they are not the centre of the problems that France is about to face. And if you go anywhere else in Europe, every country is facing up to extremely difficult times. They are dealing with it in a very brave, courageous way. And I'm thinking particularly of Italy, but also Spain and other countries across the Eurozone. And the one country that hasn't really faced up to it at all, and yet is in the middle of a presidential election, is France. And it's that we wanted to draw attention to it. It's an extraordinary sort of contradiction between the need to address public finances and public spending, and particular spending. The candidates have talked about bringing down the deficit, but practically nobody has talked seriously about the need for spending cuts.
Is it not true that the magazine is a little bit over the top? I mean, the editorial you're talking about Greece not being the real risk to the Eurozone, it's actually France. That goes a bit too far, doesn't it?
No, we're not saying it's only France. We're saying that, if France doesn't address its problems and if France doesn't prepare the electorate for the sorts of decisions that whoever's elected on May the 6th is going to face some really tough times, some really tough decisions, the markets are going to be watching very carefully to see what happens. Any slippage in meeting deficit targets is going to be dealt with mercilessly. And yet neither of the front-running candidates has actually started to prepare the ground for those sorts of decisions, and that's our reproach. I mean, it's the idea that the risk you're taking by not talking about these issues now is huge disappointment.
Does that mean then that you think the candidates, what they would actually do, the leading candidates as president on the economy, might be quite some distance from what they're saying now?
Well, I think there's a big chance that it will be. I mean, this is a huge difficulty because you're having, as a voter, I'm not a French voter, but for a French voter, you're having to make a guess about what part of what the candidate's talking about they really are going to do or put in place, and what part it's just electioneering. And all campaigns have obviously a little bit of that in every political campaign, but in France it's absolutely blatant, this sort of gap between what they're saying and promising and what's going to face them when they're elected. So I think what we're talking about, it's not just the fact that France is going to face these really tough decisions. It's as you said, that the politicians themselves know this very well.
And how bad do you think it's going to get? How bad do you think it's going to get for France, Sophie? Because, I mean, you mentioned there the AAA rating. We've already had one agency stripping France of the AAA rating. Do you think that's just the thin end of the wedge?
It depends entirely on the candidates and what they do. They will have a question of weeks or months to make mistakes and not make the right noises. If whoever's elected doesn't do the right thing, the markets will react immediately. And we've seen how fast it can happen. Last summer, if you remember, spreads on French debt moved very, very fast, not on the basis of any particular new information, but on a sense that the government wasn't doing enough to keep to its commitments on deficit reduction. And that can happen. It happened in Italy. It can happen. Markets can change overnight. And, we at the moment, France is okay. But the point is that whoever's elected is going to have to act very, very, in a very determined way to convince markets that they are on top of the issue. And that is something that no one in France is being prepared for.
Sophie Pedder, thank you very much. Great to have you with us today. That's Sophie Pedder, who's the Paris bureau chief for The Economist here in Paris. Thank you very much. Thanks to you, Elena, as well. That's today's Campaign Chronicles. More, of course, tomorrow. Catherine Nicholson's got the latest headlines after the break. Stay with us.